silence in the ballroom was louder than a scream. Ice-cold mineral water dripped from Erin's chin, staining her cheap polyester dress a dark, humiliating blue. Opposite her, Margaret Sterling lowered the empty crystal glass, her face twisted in a sneer of absolute victory. "Trash," Margaret whispered, loud enough for the entire engagement party to hear. "That washes off, my dear, unlike your poverty." The crowd gasped. Erin trembled, ready to run, ready to disappear forever. But then, the heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate slammed open. A silhouette stepped into the light, radiating power that made the billionaires in the room freeze. Erin looked up. It wasn't just a guest. It was the one man Margaret Sterling couldn't buy. The invitation had felt heavy in Erin Vance's purse, like a stone she was voluntarily carrying into deep water. The venue was the Sterling family estate in the Hamptons, a sprawling architectural beast of white marble and manicured ivy that looked more like a museum than a home. It was the kind of place where the air itself smelled expensive, a mix of sea salt, old money, and judgment. Erin checked her reflection in the rearview mirror of her 10-year-old Honda Civic one last time. She adjusted the collar of her dress. It was a soft blue A-line she'd bought on sale at Macy's, specifically for this weekend. She had thought it looked elegant in the dressing room, but parked next to a line of Bentleys and Aston Martins, it felt like a costume. "You look beautiful," Lucas said, reaching across the console to squeeze her hand. Lucas Sterling was the reason she was here. He was kind, with soft brown eyes that didn't seem to belong to a family known for their shark-like business tactics. "Don't let her get to you. It's just dinner, an engagement announcement, that's all." "Just dinner," Erin repeated, her voice tight. "Lucas, your mother has made it very clear she thinks I'm after the Sterling fortune. She called my job at the design firm quaint. She thinks because I grew up in foster care, I'm looking for a payout." "She doesn't know you," Lucas insisted, though his eyes darted away, a telltale sign he was nervous too. "Once she sees how happy you make me, she'll come around. Margaret Sterling is tough, but she loves her family." Erin forced a smile. She didn't tell him that she had received a text from an unknown number 2 days ago. It had been short and brutal. "Stay away, or you'll be exposed." She hadn't told Lucas because she didn't want to cause a rift between him and his mother before they even had a chance. They stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched loudly under Erin's heels, as a valet, a man named Arthur, who looked better dressed than she was, took the keys to her Honda with a politely neutral expression. As they ascended the main steps, the double doors opened. Inside, the engagement party was already in full swing. This wasn't the intimate family dinner Lucas had promised. There were at least 50 people milling about the foyer and the grand salon. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. Waiters circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than Erin's rent. "Lucas!" A voice cut through the low hum of conversation. Margaret Sterling stood at the top of the grand staircase. She was a woman who defied age, not through warmth, but through sheer preservation and expensive procedures. She wore a floor-length emerald gown that clashed violently with the welcoming smile she faked for her son. Her eyes, however, landed on Erin like laser sights. "Mother," Lucas said, leading Erin up the stairs. "You remember Erin." Margaret didn't extend a hand. Instead, she tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Erin, yes. The graphic artist." "Graphic designer, Mrs. Sterling," Erin corrected gently. "Right," Margaret said, dismissing the correction with a wave of her manicured hand. "I see you wore the blue. How brave." The insult was subtle, wrapped in ambiguity, but it hit its mark. Erin felt her cheeks heat up. "Come," Margaret said, turning her back on them. The board members are eager to meet the girl who distracted my son from the merger with the Kensington Group. Erin felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She whispered to Lucas, "Board members? You said this was family." "They are family," Lucas whispered back, looking pained. "In a way. The business is the family, Erin. Just survive tonight. Please. For me." They moved into the dining hall. The table was set for 20 key guests, the inner circle of Sterling Industries. Erin was seated between a man named Richard Coleman, the CFO, and a woman named Beatrice Vance, no relation, who was a corporate lawyer known for destroying prenup disputes. As the first course was served, a scallop ceviche with truffle oil, the interrogation began. "So, Erin," Richard Coleman started, not bothering to look at her as he dissected a scallop. "Lucas tells us you're from Ohio. Dayton, was it?" "Cleveland, actually," Erin said. "And your parents?" Beatrice asked from her other side. Her voice was sharp, like a pen clicking. "What do they do?" The table went quiet. Even Lucas froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He knew this was the sore spot. "I grew up in the system," Erin said, keeping her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands beneath the tablecloth. "My parents passed away when I was very young. I don't remember them." Margaret Sterling, seated at the head of the table like a queen on a throne, let out a short, cold laugh. "Such a tragic story. It plays very well, doesn't it? The orphan girl pulling herself up by her boot straps. It's almost cinematic." "It's the truth," Erin said, meeting Margaret's gaze. "Truth is a commodity, my dear," Margaret replied, sipping her wine. "And in my experience, girls with no history often invent the most convenient futures, usually involving a joint bank account." "Mother, stop," Lucas said, his voice low. "I'm just protecting you, Lucas," Margaret snapped, her veneer of politeness cracking. "Someone has to. You're too naive. You bring this nobody into our house, threaten our standing with the Kensingtons, and expect me to applaud." Erin stood up. The scraping of her chair against the parquet floor echoed in the silent room. "I think I should go to the ladies' room." "Sit down," Margaret commanded. "No," Erin said, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I love your son, Mrs. Sterling. I don't care about your money. I have my own life, my own career." "Your career?" Margaret scoffed. "You make flyers. My son runs a billion-dollar empire. Do not pretend you are equals." Erin turned to Lucas, pleading with her eyes for him to stand up, to say something, to leave with her. But Lucas just sat there, pale and paralyzed, caught between the mother who controlled his inheritance and the woman he claimed to love. The betrayal stung worse than the insults. Erin turned to leave the table, but a waiter, seemingly by accident, blocked her path, forcing her to remain near Margaret's end of the table. "I haven't finished with you," Margaret said, standing up slowly. She picked up her water glass. "You think you can walk away? You think you can embarrass me in front of my board?" "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," Erin said, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to leave." "You're a gold digger, Erin," Margaret hissed, her face contorting with malice, "and dirt needs to be washed away." The water hit Erin with shocking force. It wasn't just a splash. Margaret had thrown the entire contents of the heavy crystal goblet with a vicious, practiced swing. The ice cube struck Erin's cheekbone, stinging sharp and hard, while the water soaked instantly into the bodice of her cheap blue dress. The cold liquid ran down her neck, chilling her to the bone, but the heat of humiliation was scorching. A collective gasp ripped through the dining room. Beatrice Vance covered her mouth. Richard Coleman looked away, feigning interest in the centerpiece. The silence that followed was suffocating. Erin stood frozen, water dripping from her nose and chin. Her mascara, not waterproof, began to run, clouding her vision. She felt small, smaller than she had ever felt in the foster homes, smaller than when she was begging for student loans. "Look at you," Margaret sneered, placing the glass down on the table with a heavy thud. "A wet dog, that is what you are. You don't belong here, Erin. You never did. Now get out of my house before I have security throw you out." Erin wiped her eyes, her hand coming away black with makeup. She looked at Lucas. Lucas remained seated. He was staring at his plate, his knuckles white as he gripped the tablecloth. He didn't look up. He didn't move to help her. He didn't offer a napkin. "Lucas," Erin whispered. "Go, Erin," Lucas mumbled, his voice cracking. Just go. Please." That broke her. The man she thought was her partner, her protector, was nothing more than a coward in a tailored suit. Erin turned, her shoes squelching slightly on the expensive rug. She held her head high, despite the water dripping down her dress, and began to walk toward the double doors of the dining hall. She had to get to her car. She had to get away from these people. She reached for the brass handles of the massive doors. Boom! The doors didn't just open, they were thrown open from the outside with such force that they banged against the inner walls. A gust of wind seemed to enter the room, followed by the heavy, rhythmic click of dress shoes on the marble floor. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was tall, well over 6 feet, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than the Sterling Estate's annual tax bill. He had dark hair, sharp, predatory features, and eyes the color of steel. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like an invasion. Behind him stood 2 large men in black suits, clearly private security, and a woman holding a tablet, looking terrified. Margaret Sterling's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking ghostly pale beneath her makeup. "Tony," she whispered. The name rippled through the room like a shockwave. Tony Thorne. Erin stopped, her hand still hovering near the doorframe. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Tony Thorne was the CEO of Thorne Global, a tech and logistics conglomerate that swallowed companies like Sterling Industries for breakfast. He was a recluse, a billionaire known for his ruthlessness and his obsession with privacy. He hadn't been seen in public for 3 years. Why was he here? Tony didn't look at Margaret. He didn't look at the board members who were now scrambling to stand up out of respect or fear. His eyes scanned the room and locked instantly onto Erin. He took in the sight of her. The soaked dress, the running makeup, the trembling hands. His expression, previously cold and unreadable, darkened into something terrifying. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He walked past the stunned guests, moving with a predator's grace, straight toward Erin. Erin flinched as he approached, instinctively stepping back. She was used to men in suits bringing bad news. Tony stopped 2 feet in front of her. He ignored the water dripping from her clothes. He reached out, his movement surprisingly gentle, and took off his suit jacket. With a fluid motion, he draped the heavy, warm wool over Erin's shoulders, pulling it tight to cover her soaked dress. Erin stammered, confused. "Mr. Thorne?" Tony turned slowly to face the room. He placed a protective hand on Erin's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was a low baritone that carried to every corner of the silent hall. "Margaret," Tony said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an indictment. "Tony," Margaret stuttered, her composure shattering. We didn't know you were coming. We would have prepared. I didn't come for your food," Tony cut her off. He gestured to the wet floor around Erin. "I came to pick up my sister." The silence that followed was absolute. Lucas's head snapped up. "Sister?" Margaret grabbed the edge of the table. "What?" That's impossible. She's a nobody. She's an orphan from Cleveland." "She is Erin Thorne," Tony said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "We were separated 20 years ago when our parents died in the crash. I was taken by our grandfather in London. She was lost to the system in Ohio due to a clerical error I have spent the last decade correcting." He looked down at Erin, his eyes softening for the first time. "I found you 3 months ago, Elle. I wanted to give you space, to let you live your life. I had my security keep an eye on you to keep you safe." He looked back at Margaret, and the softness vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "I was watching when she entered this house. I was listening on the audio feed when you insulted her. And I was watching," he pointed a finger at Margaret that felt like a loaded gun, "when you threw that water." Tony reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen. "As of 2 minutes ago," Tony announced to the room, "Thorne Global has initiated a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries. I have already purchased the majority share of your debt from the bank." Richard Coleman, the CFO, dropped his fork. It clattered loudly on the china. You can't do that." "It's done," Tony said calmly. "I don't tolerate disrespect toward my family, especially from people who are now technically my employees." He looked at Lucas, who was shaking in his chair. "And you," Tony said with disgust. "You let this happen. You are not fit to breathe the same air as her, let alone marry her." Tony turned back to Erin, offering his arm. "Come on, Elle. We're leaving. This place smells like rot." Erin looked at Lucas one last time. He looked small, pathetic, and trapped. Then she looked at Margaret, who was slumped in her chair, looking old and defeated. Finally, she looked at the stranger, her brother, who had just burned the world down for her. "Okay," Erin whispered. She took his arm. The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was quieter than a church. The windows were tinted so heavily that the flashing cameras of the paparazzi, who had somehow already gathered at the Sterling estate gates, were nothing but distant, muffled pops of light. Erin sat pressed against the leather door, shivering despite the warmth of Tony's suit jacket. She stared at the man sitting opposite her. He was typing furiously on his phone, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He looked like a titan of industry, cold and efficient. He didn't look like the brother she had dreamed of as a child, the blurry memory of a boy who used to push her on the swings. "Stop staring," Tony said without looking up. "It's rude, even for family." "I'm not staring," Erin snapped, her voice finding its footing. "I'm studying. You claim to be my brother. You claim to have bought a company in 5 minutes to defend my honor. But for 20 years, I was wearing hand-me-down shoes and eating government cheese while you were, what? Building an empire?" Tony stopped typing. He set the phone down on the center console. The car hummed as it sped toward the city, leaving the Hamptons behind. "I didn't know, Erin," he said, his voice softer now, lacking the performative edge he had used in the ballroom. "I was 10 when the crash happened. Grandfather Thorne, Silas Thorne, came for me at the hospital. He told me you died in the ambulance." Erin felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with her wet dress. "He told you I was dead?" "Yes, and I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my grandfather. He took me to London. He raised me to be a machine, to take over Thorne Global. I was forbidden from asking about the past." Tony rubbed his temples, a gesture that made him look suddenly human. "It wasn't until Silas died last year that I got access to his private archives. I found the death certificates. Yours was forged." Erin looked out the window at the passing highway lights, blurring into streaks of gold and red. "Why? Why separate us? Because of the trust fund, Tony said, his voice hardening. Our mother was wealthy in her own right. Her will stipulated that if she died, her assets were to be split between us. But if one of us didn't survive, the entirety of the estate went to the surviving child, under the stewardship of the guardian, until age 25. Silas didn't want to manage 2 grieving children. He wanted the capital to leverage a merger in the late 90s. 1 child was an heir, 2 were a liability, so he paid a judge in Ohio to lose your paperwork and put you in the system. Tears pricked Erin's eyes again, but these were tears of rage. I slept in a garage for 6 months when I was 12 because my foster father locked me out. And your grandfather did that for a merger? For power, Tony corrected. And that is why I destroyed Sterling tonight. Because I know what it's like to be controlled by people who value money over blood. Margaret Sterling reminds me of Silas. The car slowed, pulling into the underground garage of a glass spire in Manhattan, the Thorn Tower. We're here, Tony said. This is your home now, Elle. I know it's a lot. I know you don't trust me, but I spent millions on private investigators, hacking state databases, and bribing social workers just to find the paper trail that led to Erin Vance. I didn't leave you. I was stolen, too. They took a private elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into a living space that was larger than the entire foster home Erin had grown up in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the skyline. It was breathtaking, but cold, minimalist. I have a guest room prepared, Tony said, gesturing to a hallway. There are clothes in the closet. My assistant, Sarah, guessed your size. Tomorrow, we will get you a proper wardrobe. Tonight, just rest. Erin walked toward the hallway, but stopped. She turned back to Tony, who was pouring himself a drink at a marble bar. Lucas, she said. Tony paused, the decanter hovering over the glass. What about him? He didn't stand up for me, she whispered. I thought he loved me. Tony turned, his eyes dark. Men like Lucas Sterling don't know what love is, Erin. They only know possession and convenience. He loved how you made him feel. Rebellious, perhaps. Or maybe he just liked that you were safe and unthreatening. But when it came to choosing between you and his inheritance, he made his choice before the water even hit your face. Tony took a sip of the amber liquid. But don't worry, he's going to regret it. Tomorrow morning, the real game begins. Get some sleep, sister. You're going to need it. Erin went into the bedroom. It was luxurious, with silk sheets and a bathroom bigger than her apartment kitchen. She showered, scrubbing the sticky feeling of the Sterling party off her skin. She put on a silk robe she found in the closet. It fit perfectly. She lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling. She was an heiress. She was a thorn. She had a billionaire brother. But as she closed her eyes, all she could see was Lucas's face, looking down at his plate while his mother called her trash. The sadness in her chest began to calcify. It was hardening into something else, something colder, something that felt a lot like the steel in Tony's eyes. The sun rose over Manhattan like a promise of violence. Erin woke to the smell of coffee, expensive, freshly ground coffee, and the sound of hushed voices. She walked out into the living area. Tony was there, dressed in a fresh navy suit, looking as if he hadn't slept at all. He was speaking to a team of 4 people, 2 women with garment bags, a man with a tablet, and a woman holding a makeup case. She's awake, Tony said, hanging up a call. Good. Erin, this is your team. My team? Erin blinked, tightening the robe around her. Styling, public relations and legal. Tony listed them off casually. We have a meeting at Sterling Industries at 10 a.m. You can't walk in there looking like Erin Vance, the graphic designer. You need to walk in there like Erin Thorne, the majority shareholder. Erin felt a jolt of anxiety. I'm going there. To see them. You own them, Tony said, walking over and placing a hand on her shoulder. Margaret thinks this is a hostile takeover she can fight in court. She thinks she can spin the narrative. She's already leaked a story to the Post, claiming you're a mental patient I hired to scam them. Erin gasped. She what? It's a desperate move, Tony assured her. But we are going to kill it at the source. We are going to walk into that boardroom, and you are going to take her seat. Are you ready? Erin thought about the humiliation. She thought about the water dripping down her chin. She looked at Tony, who was offering her a chance to be the hammer instead of the nail. I'm ready, she said. 2 hours later, Erin looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. The team had dressed her in a sharp, white power suit that looked like it had been sculpted from marble. Her hair was sleek and straight, her makeup flawless but fierce. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. They took the helicopter. Landing on the roof of the Sterling building was a power move Tony insisted on. They need to feel the vibration of our arrival, he had said. When they stepped out of the elevator on the executive floor, the atmosphere was chaotic. Employees were whispering in huddles. Phones were ringing off the hook. At the reception desk, the secretary, a woman named Deborah who had once looked down her nose at Erin when she brought Lucas lunch, dropped her phone. Her mouth hung open. More. Mr. Thorne, Deborah stammered. Mrs. Sterling is in the conference room. She said she's not to be disturbed. I don't disturb, Tony said, not breaking stride. I disrupt. Tony motioned for the security guards to open the double-glass doors of the main conference room. Inside, the atmosphere was funereal. Margaret Sterling sat at the head of the table, looking haggard. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair slightly out of place. Lucas was next to her, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Richard Coleman and the other board members were arguing loudly. We have to liquidate the overseas assets to buy back the stock, Richard was shouting. We don't have the liquidity, Beatrice Vance yelled back. Silence! Margaret slammed her hand on the table. I believe, Erin's voice cut through the noise, clear and steady. That is my seat. The room went dead silent. Every head turned. Erin walked into the room, flanked by Tony and his security. She didn't look at the floor. She looked directly at Margaret. The white suit she wore was a stark contrast to the blue dress she had ruined the night before. It was armor. Erin? Lucas breathed, standing up. He looked at her with a mix of awe and terror. Erin, wait, we can explain. Sit down, Lucas, Tony commanded. Lucas sat. You have no right to be here, Margaret hissed, though her voice wavered. Security. Get them out. Your security works for me now, Tony said, pulling out a chair for Erin at the opposite end of the table. I bought the private security firm contracted by this building at 8 a.m. this morning. In fact, everyone in this building works for me, or more accurately, for us. Tony remained standing, looming over the table. Let's keep this brief. Sterling Industries is insolvent. Your mismanagement, Margaret, has hidden debt in shell companies in the Caymans. I've already sent the files to the SEC. You're not just broke. You're likely going to prison. Margaret's face turned grey. You hacked our private servers. I audited my new acquisition. Tony smiled without warmth. But I'm a generous man. I'm willing to keep the company afloat. I'm willing to keep the employees paid. Under one condition. What condition? Richard Coleman asked, desperate for a lifeline. Tony pointed to Erin. She becomes the chairwoman of the board, effective immediately, and she decides who stays and who goes. All eyes turned to Erin. The power in the room shifted physically. It rushed toward her like a tide. She looked at Richard Coleman. "You called me a gold digger, Mr. Coleman. But looking at these financials, it seems you've been skimming off the top of the pension fund for 5 years. You're fired." Richard gasped. "You can't— Get out!" Tony's security chief stepped forward. Richard scrambled to gather his papers and fled the room. Erin turned her gaze to Beatrice. "And you? You questioned my family history. Now you know it. I don't think we need a lawyer who judges people based on their pedigree rather than their talent. You're fired." Beatrice stood up, her face tight, and marched out without a word. Finally, Erin looked at the end of the table, at Margaret and Lucas. "Erin, please," Lucas said, his voice trembling. He stood up and walked around the table toward her. He reached out a hand. "I love you. I was scared last night. My mother, she controls everything. But I wanted to help you, I swear." He was close now. Erin could smell his cologne, the same cologne she used to find comforting. Now it just smelled like weakness. "You love me?" Erin asked quietly. "Yes." Lucas nodded frantically. "I do. We can fix this. We can run this company together. Imagine it, Erin. You and me." Erin looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. "Imagine this," she said coldly, echoing the phrase she hated. "A man who watches the woman he loves get humiliated and does nothing. That isn't a man, Lucas. That's a child." She stood up. "I'm not firing you, Lucas." Lucas exhaled, a look of relief washing over him. "Thank you. I knew you still—" "I'm demoting you," Erin cut him off. "You've never worked a real day in your life. You've never struggled. So you're going to start at the bottom. The mail room in the basement needs a sorter. Minimum wage. No benefits. If you want to stay in the family business, that's where you start. 8 a.m. tomorrow." Lucas stared at her, his mouth agape. The mailroom? "Take it or leave it," Erin said, turning away from him. She looked at Margaret. The older woman was shaking. "And you?" Erin said. Margaret straightened her spine, trying to summon the last shreds of her dignity. "I will not be humiliated by a street rat." "You did this to yourself," Erin said. "I'm not firing you, Margaret, because you don't work here anymore. You're being evicted." "Evicted?" Margaret shrieked. "This is my company, my house." "The estate was collateral on the business loans," Tony interjected smoothly. "Loans that are now in default. The bank, which I own a controlling interest in, has foreclosed on the Hamptons estate. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Margaret looked around the room, realizing she was completely alone. Her allies were gone. Her son was a mailroom clerk. Her empire was dust. She stood up, her legs wobbly. She looked at Erin with pure, unadulterated hatred. "This isn't over," Margaret whispered. "You think you've won? You don't know who I know. You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know you throw water very well," Erin said calmly, "but I throw bricks." Margaret stormed out of the room, Lucas trailing behind her like a beaten puppy. As the door closed, Erin let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 24 hours. She slumped slightly in the chair. Tony placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Elle." "I felt sick," Erin admitted. "Did I go too far?" "You didn't go far enough," Tony said. "Because Margaret is right about one thing. It's not over." She made a call before we entered the room. "Who did she call?" Tony's expression turned grim. "She called a man named Sebastian Vane. He's a tabloid fixer, the kind who destroys reputations for sport. If Margaret is calling him, she's not just planning a defense. She's planning to destroy your past." Erin looked at her brother. "My past? There's nothing there. Just foster homes and school." There's the gap, Tony said darkly. The 3 years when you were 16 to 19. The years you ran away. Erin froze. She hadn't told anyone about that time, not even Lucas. How do you know about that? She whispered. I know everything, Tony said. But Vane will find out too, and he will twist it. We need to get ahead of this. We need to go back to Ohio. Erin shook her head. No, I can't go back there. We have to, Tony said, because if we don't find him before Margaret does, this whole victory falls apart. Find who? The man you ran away with, Tony said. The man who knows why you really changed your name. The private jet touched down at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport under a sky the color of a bruised plum. Rain lashed against the windows, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled luxury of the cabin. Erin stared out at the grey tarmac. Her stomach churned with a nausea that had nothing to do with the turbulence. I swore I'd never come back here, she whispered. Tony was already unbuckling his seatbelt. We aren't staying. We are here for an extraction operation. Nothing more. You don't understand, Erin said, turning to him. Caleb won't just come with us. He hates me. When I ran away at 16, I promised I'd come back for him. I didn't. I got into art school. I met Lucas. I forgot him, Tony. I let myself forget because remembering was too painful. Guilt is a useless emotion, Erin, Tony said, checking a heavily encrypted tablet. It's a luxury we can't afford right now. Sebastian Vane landed a charter flight here 40 minutes ago. He's ahead of us. They descended the stairs to a waiting convoy of 3 black SUVs. This wasn't the flashy Rolls-Royce from New York. These were armored vehicles, designed for war zones. Where is he? Erin asked, as they sped onto the highway, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. My intel puts him in the flats, Tony said. He works at a salvage yard during the day, lives in a squat nearby. The drive took them past the ghosts of Erin's past, the crumbling library where she used to hide, the corner store where she bought cup noodles with stolen change. The city felt heavy, like it was trying to pull her back into the mud. They arrived at the salvage yard, a graveyard of rusted metal and crushed cars located under a weeping bridge. The air smelled of oil and river rot. Stay in the car, Tony ordered his security detail. Just me and Erin. They walked through the maze of stacked cars. In the center, under a corrugated tin roof, a man was welding a bumper. Sparks flew in violent showers, illuminating his face. He was lean, covered in grease, with a jagged scar running down his left arm. Caleb, Erin called out. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. The welding stopped. The man lifted his mask. He had hard eyes, the kind that had seen too much and expected nothing good. He looked at Erin, and for a second, there was recognition. Then, the shutters came down. You got the wrong place, lady, Caleb said, turning back to his work. Caleb, it's me. Elle. Elle's dead, Caleb spat, not looking at her. Died 5 years ago when she walked out that door and never looked back. I know. Erin stepped forward, ignoring the mud ruining her expensive shoes. I'm sorry. I was scared. But I'm here now because you're in danger. Caleb laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I'm always in danger, Princess. Look around. This isn't the Hamptons. Listen to me. Tony stepped in, his voice commanding. A woman named Margaret Sterling has hired a fixer to find you. She knows about the fire at the foster home. She knows you were the one holding the gas can. Caleb froze. He dropped the welding torch. I didn't start that fire. You know that, Elle. It was old man Miller. He wanted the insurance money. I know, Erin said desperately. But Margaret doesn't care about the truth. She wants to frame me for it. She wants to say we did it together. If they find you, they will twist it. They will send you to prison to get to me." "Why should I care?" Caleb crossed his arms. "You got a rich boyfriend? Some billionaire saving you?" "I am her brother," Tony said, "and I can offer you something better than revenge. I can offer you a life, a clean slate, money, a way out of this junkyard." Caleb looked at Tony, sizing him up. "You think you can buy me?" "I think everyone has a price," Tony said. "Yours is freedom." Before Caleb could answer, the sound of tires screeching on gravel echoed through the yard. "They're here!" Tony hissed. He grabbed Erin's arm. "Get behind me!" 3 cars blocked the exit. Men in trench coats stepped out. In the center stood Sebastian Vane. He was a small man, unassuming, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a beige raincoat. He looked like an accountant, but his eyes were dead. "Mr. Thorne," Vane called out, his voice pleasant. "A pleasure to finally see you in the wild, and the lovely Erin. Or should I say, the fire starter?" "Leave," Tony warned. His hand went to his belt. Though he wasn't armed, his security team was outside the perimeter, blocked by Vane's trucks. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Vane smiled. "Mrs. Sterling pays very well for exclusivity. I'm here for the boy. Caleb, isn't it? We have a statement for you to sign. It says Erin forced you to light the match. Sign it, and you get $50,000. Caleb looked at Vane, then at Erin. "He's lying, Caleb," Erin said. "Once you sign it, you're a liability. They'll get rid of you." $50,000, Caleb muttered. He took a step toward Vane. "Caleb, no!" Erin screamed. Caleb walked up to Vane. He looked at the check Vane was holding out. He reached for it. Then, with a speed born of street fights, Caleb drove a steel-toed boot into Vane's knee. Vane crumpled with a howl of pain. Caleb spun and punched the nearest thug in the throat. "Run!" Caleb yelled. Chaos erupted. Tony grabbed a rusted exhaust pipe from a pile and swung it, cracking the jaw of a man lunging for Erin. "Go! To the back!" Tony shouted, pushing Erin toward a gap in the fence. They scrambled over the wet metal, slipping and sliding. Tony fought with a brutality Erin had never seen, using his elbows and knees like weapons. He wasn't just a corporate shark. He had been trained. Tony's security team finally broke through the blockade, their SUVs ramming Vane's cars aside. Men in tactical gear swarmed the yard, subduing Vane's thugs within seconds. Silence returned to the scrapyard, broken only by Vane's moans of pain. Caleb stood panting, wiping blood from his lip. He looked at Erin. "You kept the check?" Erin asked, noticing the paper crumpled in his fist. Caleb looked at it, then ripped it into shreds. "I don't take money from rats." He looked at Tony. "You said you offer a clean slate?" "The jet is waiting," Tony said, straightening his suit, which was now torn and muddy. "Welcome to the family, Caleb." They returned to New York under the cover of darkness, smuggling Caleb into the penthouse. The atmosphere was tense. They had won the skirmish in Ohio, but the war was just starting. By morning, the headlines were screaming. Billionaire bride or Bonnie and Clyde, Erin Thorne's secret criminal past. Margaret had released the story anyway. Without Caleb's testimony, it was all speculation, but the court of public opinion didn't require evidence. The news channels were running loops of the burnt-out shell of the foster home from 5 years ago. They had interviews with anonymous sources, claiming Erin was a troubled, violent child. Erin sat in the living room, watching the TV. Her face was pale. "Turn it off," Tony said, walking in with a cup of coffee. "They hate me," Erin whispered. "Yesterday I was a victim. Today I'm a monster." "It's a distraction," Tony said calmly. "Margaret is trying to tank the stock price of Sterling Industries so she can buy it back cheap. It's a classic short-sell strategy." "This isn't about stocks, Tony," Erin shouted, standing up. "This is my life. Lucas is out there. Does he believe this? As if summoned, Erin's phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucas. Can we talk? Alone. I know my mother went too far. I want to help you clear your name. Meet me at the boathouse in Central Park. Please. Erin showed the phone to Tony. It's a trap, Tony said immediately. I know, Erin said. But it's also an opportunity. If he admits his mother is behind the lies, I can record him. Too dangerous, Tony shook his head. Vane failed in Cleveland. They will be desperate. I need to do this, Erin insisted. I can't hide behind you forever, Tony. You saved me at the party. You saved me in Ohio. Let me save myself this time. Tony looked at her for a long moment. He saw the steel in her eyes, the same steel he saw in the mirror. Fine, Tony said. But you're wired, and my snipers will be on the perimeter. If he touches you, he loses a hand. The Central Park boathouse was quiet in the mid-morning mist. Lucas was waiting on a bench near the water. He looked disheveled. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He wore jeans and a sweater, trying to look approachable. Erin, he stood up as she approached. He tried to hug her, but she stepped back. Talk, Lucas, she said coldly. I'm so sorry, Lucas said, running a hand through his hair. My mother. She's lost her mind. I told her not to leak the arson story. I told her it was a lie. But you didn't stop her, Erin said. I couldn't. She cut me off, Erin. She froze my accounts. I'm broke. I'm working in the mailroom, just like you said. Lucas looked at her with pleading eyes. But I can fix this. I have files, emails between her and Vane, proof that she fabricated the evidence against you. Erin's heart skipped a beat. You have proof? Yes, Lucas nodded eagerly. I can give it to you. We can destroy her together. And then, maybe you can forgive me? Where are the files? Erin asked. I have them on a drive. Lucas reached into his pocket, but he paused. But I need something from you first. What? Marry me, Lucas said. Erin stared at him. What? Marry me, Lucas repeated, his voice gaining a frantic edge. If we marry, the merger between our families is natural. The hostile takeover becomes a partnership. I get my position back. You get your reputation back. It's a win-win. You want to use me as a business strategy? Erin asked, disgust rising in her throat. After everything? It's not just business. Lucas grabbed her wrist. I love you. And you need me. Look at the news, Erin. You're drowning. I'm the only life raft you have. Erin looked down at his hand on her wrist. She thought about the water dripping down her dress. She thought about Caleb in the scrapyard. She thought about Tony fighting for her. You aren't a life raft, Lucas, Erin said, her voice steady. You're an anchor. She ripped her hand away. And I'm done sinking. You bitch, Lucas snarled, his nice guy mask falling away instantly. You think you're better than us? You're gutter trash. My mother was right. We should have crushed you when we had the chance. Did you get that? Erin said clearly to the air. Loud and clear. Tony's voice crackled in her hidden earpiece. Lucas looked around, confused. Who are you talking to? The world, Erin said. She pointed to a jogger who had stopped nearby, and a tourist feeding ducks. The jogger pulled a professional camera out of his jacket. The tourist lifted a boom mic. We're live streaming, Lucas. Erin smiled. Tony bought a media network this morning. You're trending. Lucas's face went white. He scrambled back, looking at the hidden cameras. No, you can't. It's over, Lucas, Erin said. Tell your mother I'll see her at the gala tonight, and tell her to wear something waterproof. Erin turned and walked away, leaving Lucas stammering at the lenses. That night, the Sterling Charity Gala was the event of the season. It was supposed to be Margaret's victory lap. Instead, it was a wake. Margaret stood on the stage in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. She was trying to give a speech about family values, but the crowd was murmuring. People were checking their phones. The video of Lucas in the park had gone viral. Lucas es Isolosa was the #1 hashtag globally. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom cut out. A spotlight hit the balcony. Erin stood there. She wore a gown of liquid gold that shimmered like fire. Tony stood to her right, and to her left, cleaned up and wearing a tuxedo that barely contained his muscles, stood Caleb. Erin walked to the microphone on the balcony. "Sorry to interrupt," Erin said, her voice booming over the speakers, "but I believe there's been a misunderstanding about a fire in Ohio." She gestured to the massive screen behind Margaret on the stage. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't the fake news report. It was a video Caleb had kept for 5 years. A shaky cell phone video showing a man, Old Man Miller, the foster dad, pouring gasoline in the hallway of the group home while talking on the phone. "Yeah, Mrs. Sterling." Miller's voice was clear on the recording. "I'll burn the records. No one will know the girl is a thorn. The insurance money will cover my relocation. Just make sure the check clears." The ballroom gasped. The sound was like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room. Margaret Sterling stood frozen on stage. The video proved not just arson, but conspiracy, fraud, and a 20-year cover-up of Erin's identity. Erin looked down at Margaret from the balcony. "Checkmate," Erin whispered. But Margaret didn't collapse. She didn't cry. A look of absolute, unhinged madness crossed her face. She reached into her podium and pulled out something that gleamed under the stage lights. It was a small, pearl-handled revolver. "If I go down," Margaret screamed, aiming the gun not at Erin but at Tony, "I'm taking your precious savior with me." The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed acoustic space of the ballroom. People screamed and dove under tables. Erin flinched, instinctively grabbing the railing of the balcony. She looked to her right. Tony was still standing, but he staggered back, his hand clutching his left arm. Blood began to seep through his tuxedo jacket, dark and alarming against the fabric. "Tony!" Erin screamed, terror gripping her heart. Margaret Sterling stood on the stage, her hands shaking violently, the smoking gun still pointed upward. She prepared to fire again, her eyes wide with a maniacal glaze. "I won't let you take it!" she shrieked. "It's mine!" She leveled the gun for a second shot, aiming directly at Erin's chest. But before she could pull the trigger, a blur of motion collided with her from the side. It was Lucas. He had sprinted from the edge of the stage, tears streaming down his face, and tackled his mother with the force of a linebacker. The gun skittered across the floor, spinning away into the orchestra pit. "Stop it!" Lucas screamed, pinning Margaret to the floor as she thrashed and clawed at his face. "It's over, Mother. Stop!" "You traitor!" Margaret spat, slapping him. "You weak, pathetic boy! I did this for you!" "You did this for yourself!" Lucas sobbed, holding her down until the security team, Tony's security team, swarmed the stage. On the balcony, Erin was on her knees beside Tony. Caleb was already there, ripping his cummerbund off to use as a tourniquet. "It's just a graze." Tony grit his teeth, his face pale but composed. "She's a terrible shot." "You're bleeding!" Erin cried, her hands shaking as she pressed down on the wound. "I've had worse," Tony said, looking at her with intense focus. "Are you okay? Did she hit you?" "I'm fine," Erin said, tears spilling over. "You idiot, you stood in front of me." "That's the job," Tony smiled weakly. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The spell of the evening was broken, replaced by the chaotic reality of flashing blue lights and police radios. Erin stood up and looked down at the stage. The police were cuffing Margaret Sterling. She looked small now, stripped of her dignity, her expensive gown torn, her hair a mess. As they dragged her away, she looked up at the balcony. She locked eyes with Erin one last time. There was no remorse in her gaze, only a hollow, consuming hatred. Then they looked at Lucas. He was sitting on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands, alone in the middle of the wreckage of his family's legacy. He didn't look up as his mother was taken away. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the newly christened Thorne Vance Enterprises, formerly Sterling Industries. The sign was sleek, modern, and imposing. Erin walked into the CEO's office. She wore a deep crimson suit, a color of power, not of hiding. She placed her latte on the mahogany desk that used to belong to Margaret Sterling. The room had been gutted and remodeled. The heavy drapes were gone, replaced by light. The dark wood was replaced with glass and steel. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Thorne?" It was her assistant. "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes, and your brother is on line 1. "Which one?" Erin smiled, pressing the button. "The one who signs the checks." Tony's voice came through the speaker. "Hey," Erin said, sitting down. "How's London?" "Rainy. Expensive, the usual," Tony said. "I'm looking at the quarterly reports. You're up 15% since the rebrand. The tech sector is calling you the Phoenix of Wall Street. Not bad for a graphic designer." "I have good mentors," Erin said. "How's the arm?" "Stiff when it rains," Tony replied. "But it serves as a good reminder. Never turn your back on a Sterling." "Speaking of Sterlings," Erin hesitated. "I got a letter from Lucas today." There was a pause on the line. "Did you read it?" "No," Erin said. She picked up the envelope from her desk. It was handwritten. She walked over to the paper shredder. "I don't need to read it. I know how that story ends." She fed the unopened envelope into the machine. The grinding sound was satisfying. "Good girl," Tony said. "And Caleb? He's terrorizing the new interns," Erin laughed. "He takes his job as head of security very seriously. I think he installed a retina scanner on the coffee machine." "He's protecting the assets," Tony chuckled. "I'll see you at Christmas, Elle. We're doing it at the Aspen House this year. No galas, no press, just family." "Just family," Erin repeated, a warmth spreading through her chest. She hung up the phone. The door to her office opened, and Caleb walked in. He was wearing a suit now, though he still refused to wear a tie, and the scar on his arm was visible when he rolled up his sleeves. "Meeting time, boss," Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe. "You ready to go eat the sharks?" Erin stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. 6 months ago, she was a girl in a cheap blue dress, dripping wet and humiliated. Today, she owned the skyline. She turned to Caleb, her eyes flashing with the same steel that ran in her brother's veins. "I'm not just going to eat them, Caleb," Erin smiled. "I'm going to make them pay for the dinner." She grabbed her tablet and walked toward the door. "Let's go." What a roller coaster. From being humiliated with a glass of water to owning the entire empire. Erin Thorne proved that the best revenge isn't just success, it's taking the throne. I want to know what you think. Was Erin right to shred Lucas's letter without reading it? He saved her life in the end, but he also watched her suffer for months. Does one good deed erase 1,000 cowardices, or is an X for a reason? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, billionaire justice, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss the next episode of our drama series. We have an even crazier story coming next week, involving a secret baby and a mafia boss. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.